Hi, I'm Patrick Cody with Okemo Valley TV, and I have invited our Senate delegation from the Windsor District to join us today. It's Senator Alison Clarkson, Senator Dick McCormack, and Senator Alison Nitka to join us here via Zoom, which seems to be the platform of the day. We all had to learn basically how to use it overnight. Now I've been using it for the last couple months. So here we are. Thank you, senators, from your respective homes throughout the county. And I wanted to invite you in today to talk about where things are and maybe help put this into context and talk about some of the important bills coming down the pike and what your lives look like now as senators and how you've adjusted to the current times during this pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to Senator Clarkson, who's going to give us some context and to do a little introduction. So thank you, Senator Clarkson.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's great to be here today. And I'm Alison Clarkson, and I represent the Windsor District along with Alice and Dick. The Senate has been working remotely. The whole legislature has been working remotely since March 13th when we all went home. And we have had as a priority working primarily on COVID-related relief and response bills. We have put aside our agenda and the bills we were working on. We were almost at crossover, which is the period where the bills go from one body to the other. And we put all that work aside that we've been working on for 2.5 months to really address the pressing needs of this pandemic and the people of Vermont and what they can do. So each of our committees, and we'll introduce that, we'll go through what we've been addressing in terms of relief and response to this pandemic in each of our subject areas. We had to vote. We had to actually vote in person to be able to work remotely and to vote remotely. So it's a big deal, first time in the history of Vermont that the Senate and the House are able to both hold committee meetings remotely via Zoom and to vote in committee and as a body remotely. It's first time ever, and it's historic. I wish we weren't having to do it, but there we are. So that is sort of the context within which we're working, and it is surprisingly busy. We are flat out. It's astonishing how much we had to do to enable our life as we are experiencing it for the last 8 weeks. To begin, because it's a health pandemic, we thought that today it would make sense for Senator McCormack to begin with the Health and Welfare Committee's response to this health crisis.
Thank you. Our system of government is deliberately slow because the founders were worried about government power. And so there are all sorts of procedures that are supposed to be followed. Really, the first thing the Health and Welfare Committee did legislatively in March, which feels like a year ago, was to create more flexibility for the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy's powers are limited, but in this kind of situation, you need fast action. So just as one example, for a hospital to expand its facilities, which is likely to raise healthcare costs, they need to get a certificate of need. And a certificate of need is a long, burdensome process. It should be, it's as it should be that it takes that long. But in an emergency, if, for example, a hospital wanted to expand its number of beds to be ready for COVID victims, you didn't want them to have to go through the whole certificate of need process. So we passed legislation that the bureaucracy could simply say, okay, and it's temporary, and it's certainly not the best of all possible worlds, but we're in the middle of an epidemic. We've also expedited the use of out-of-state nurses, out-of-state caregivers for people to be licensed in Vermont if they're from out of state. Telemedicine was something coming along anyway, but the idea of being able for a doctor to be able to deal with a patient who was not actually in the same room, Again, it's not the best, it's not the ideal, but it's certainly better than not having the care at all. And in the term now where we're trying to isolate, have social isolation, it really makes sense. Telemedicine, it may be, will linger. A lot of these procedures that we've taken on are temporary, and when the epidemic ends, we're going to go back to the good old days. Telemedicine will probably continue because it seems to be a very good idea, and it keeps costs down, and it just provides care where sometimes it wouldn't have been there at all. Flexibility, as I say, telemedicine. Childcare is an issue because childcare facilities in many ways could be a real problem, you know, in terms of social distancing. Little kids don't social distance very well, and but we are working on getting our childcare facilities up and running again. The other thing I want to talk about is deference to the governor's public health hygiene edicts, i.e., self-isolation, minimizing trips out, wearing masks when you go out, wearing the gloves, keeping 6 feet separation. I think the people of Vermont are to be congratulated and cheered for what a good job we've done with that. It is one of the reasons why, it's the major reason why the actual consequences, the sicknesses, are not as bad as we had feared. Having said that, everybody notices when they go out, there are people walking around without masks, without gloves, within 6 feet, coming within 6 feet of people who are trying to keep the social distancing. And I think there's two groups of people doing that. One are people who are just sort of negligently, mindlessly going about their business and just not caring. And then there are people who have this, I want to be as polite as I can. So I'm trying to find a really nice way to say this. A crackpot philosophy that there's some kind of God-given constitutional right to make other people sick, and that we're violating their rights if we tell them to stop making other people sick. And this is a problem, and we have to deal with it. You don't want to scold, you don't want to yell, you don't want to threaten, you don't want to pretend you're a cop. But I think in as polite a way as people can find, when you're encountering people who are not with the program, just say something like, please, 6 feet, please. I don't think that's unreasonable. You'll be accused of shaming them and so on, making themselves the victims. But I think we can just say, please, please, you're going to make me sick if you get any closer. I don't think that's a bad thing to do to people. So that's the health and welfare stuff for now. I timed myself. I did exactly 5 minutes.
Wow, impressive.
So I want to talk a little bit about some bills in the Appropriations Committee and the Judiciary Committee where I am. And one that I think most people are interested in, but we're not sure how this is going to wind up in the end, is the hazard pay grant. In other words, we all know that many people who are essential persons are in some of the lower wage jobs. For instance, cashiers, people stocking shelves in grocery stores, some of the people in medical facilities, janitors, people in the cleaning business at hospitals and nursing homes. And so many of those persons are not getting as much for their hazardous wage as many people who have been laid off and are getting unemployment or perhaps another kind of grant, as well as a $600 a week grant that people are eligible for. So the people staying home and not working are in many cases making quite a bit more money than the people who are on the front lines. So in order to try and get some equality in that, we passed, after a lot of work on it, a hazard grant bill that the hope is that it will be able to be funded by the federal CARES money. Now that's a big issue because if it isn't, it's not clear where the money could come from. Because the general fund, which is the state money, we don't have any extra money there. As a matter of fact, we're in the hole. But it would be for 2 months from the period of March 13th till May 13th, people working during that period of time. And if you were working from 34 to 108 hours a month, you would be eligible for $600 for each of those months. And if you were working more than 108, you would be eligible for $1,000 for each of those months. Now, this is for persons who are earning under $25 per hour, other than if you're working in a nursing home or hospital and you're really an essential on the line, in your face worker, then you'd be eligible even though you might be making more than the 25 per hour. So again, this is a really, I think, really deserving of those people on those front lines. And we hope that we can get it through. We passed it out of the Senate, it's in the House now. And the governor would have to be comfortable enough to sign it. And so the big question is, where is the money coming from? And we are planning on it coming out of the CARES Act, but we're not assured of that at this time. A couple other bills that we've been working on we passed a bill about wills. A lot of people in the beginning of this pandemic wanted wills done and nobody wanted to get together with them. So we made some changes so that you can get your will done quickly. There were some other people who needed things done because they needed to refinance their homes because they were going under, and people weren't allowed to do title searches and things like that. So that got resolved too. We also, the courts, of course, have put everything on hold. So court hearings, with very few exceptions, are not happening. So everything's going to come to a head when the courts reopen. So they're planning on hiring, I think, in the end, about 36 temporary employees, which is a lot of employees. They're needed. They may also have to rearrange the space where courts occur, because you wouldn't be able to do this social spacing. In other words, if you wanted to have a jury trial and you have to do a jury draw, you'd have to have that potentially in a theater, or there are some courthouses that could accommodate it. For instance, ours in Windsor County in Woodstock has 2 jury boxes, so they might be able to accommodate it, but many other courts can't. So also divisions between workers in the offices, and of course, while the courts are ramping up, the state's attorney's office and the defender general's office, there's been a hiring freeze for everybody. So they've had people who have just in course of routine stuff have left their jobs, or in the Northeast Kingdom, there simply aren't enough lawyers to give contracts to represent some people in criminal matters. So there's a lot going on there. The other thing that might be of interest to know is that we're looking at all the revenue coming in and the revenue that is not coming in because we have been closed and people haven't been working and businesses have been closed. One interesting little piece that you might or might not want to know about is for liquor and lottery department, we've been selling more liquor and doing quite well there. So they have a surplus. There's a couple other factors in that. More people are buying more, I guess they could say low-end alcoholic drinks. In other words, not the super hot, expensive ones, but they've been buying lesser value. So the surplus in their place was quite a surprise. And then I think one other thing that, well, that's enough for me for now, and move on to where we're headed next here.
Okay, so I'll pick it up from there. I'm vice chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And I also serve on Senate Government Operations. They've been very busy committees in responding to this crisis. We began in Senate Economic Development expanding the eligibility for unemployment insurance so that people who were exposed, who were afraid of being exposed, had been let go because of COVID, all aspects of this would make it eligible for you for unemployment insurance. We also have enabled the tax commissioner and the commissioner of labor to talk about incomes, because with the federal action, the self-employed and sole proprietors are able to file for pandemic unemployment assistance and to certify incomes. Those 2 departments had to be able to speak because your benefit is based on the income you earn. Everybody, however, is able to get the $600 pandemic benefit. Hardly a benefit, but it's been so important to people. Many of you have had challenges, we know, with filing for unemployment insurance. Remember, this is a system designed for so many fewer. We've had over 87,000 Vermonters file for unemployment insurance or the self-employed pandemic unemployment assistance. It has overwhelmed our system. We have a 30-year-old mainframe, which was in the process of being updated. Sadly, you can never plan for a crisis. And we only wish that this system had been upgraded before this pandemic hit. But unfortunately, it hadn't been. We now have 200 callers taking calls. Most of the problems have been worked through, but of this 87,000, we still have about 15,000 people who are stuck in what I call PUA purgatory. And those are people that have issues that are unusual in some capacity, and they get put into a special bin and need special attention. And that has slowed up payments for many of you, and we know this, and we have been going to bat for many of you who have unusual claims. In addition, we have enacted a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. We have made it possible for you to claim workers' comp with COVID if you're a frontline worker and have that as a reason for having become ill or disabled. So that, and the other huge issue in Senate Economic Development is housing. We have as you know, if you lose your job, you also lose the ability to pay your rent and maybe pay your mortgage. So we dealt with that with the moratorium. On the other hand, we now have so many people who were precariously housed or insecurely housed, people who were couch surfing, people who were doubling up. We have now 1,600 people who were either homeless or precariously housed. We have them housed through our motel voucher program. They are safely housed because, you know, we say stay home, stay safe. That assumes you have a home and that when you're there, you're safe. And so we have been working, we are using this as an opportunity to look at how we transition the homeless, the 1,600 households that are currently homeless, how we transition them into permanent housing. And that is hopefully a way that we're going to be able to use some of our CARES COVID money. On the government operations front, we have done everything from putting the fire under the e-notary bill to allowing the Secretary of State to conduct elections far more flexibly, giving him and his staff the flexibility to conduct elections by mail, either exclusively or in part. It's up to them, and they have done a terrific job preparing for this. We also have enabled municipal select boards to meet remotely, to vote remotely, to also to extend tax deadlines and to waive penalties and interest if they would like. So as you can hear from all of the committees we're representing, it has been a big push to respond in a timely fashion to the needs that that are being faced with this crisis, and new issues arrive every day. And so that's sort of an update on my two committees. You two have additional things that have sparked additional comments?
Yeah. Alice?
I just would like to say one of the things that I didn't mention was our state treasurer, Beth Pierce, has been working very closely with the legislature and we're working on, and this has been started in the House, it's going to come to the Senate, of course. It's an emergency pandemic borrowing fund
Right.
for municipalities. In other words, because some of the, they've waived the timeframes of some taxes to be paid and things like that, some communities more than others and some different things. So there's this, of course, municipalities will be short of cash also. So the plan is to have this fund. It might be, she's working with the bankers, and some of it might be from FEMA. And the plan would be for the state to pick up the interest and the other fees maybe associated with those loans, and then so that the municipalities didn't have to pay that back. And then in the end, the state would apply for CARES money under COVID to have that reimbursed to the state. I mean, that will be a big help to the municipalities who, I think there's about 82 communities already who are in need of cash. So, Dick?
One of the most exciting things that the Appropriations Committee has done lately is this special financial award to frontline workers. We make clear that it's a grant, it's not salary, because we don't want them to even have to pay taxes on it. And what it is this. There was we have provided all manner of benefits to people to compensate them for staying home. We want people to isolate, we want people to stay home, but that could result at first glance on a loss of income. And so early back in March, both at the federal and state level, we started providing money for people who were staying home. And we made it very clear, if you have to take care of kids because, you you stay home. If you're worried, your boss wants you to come into work, but you're worried about the epidemic, you stay home and you get compensated. And it created a perverse incentive where many workers were better off financially staying home than going to work. Well, that was sort of the idea, except we have some frontline workers who really are essential, that we need them on the job. And also, you wanted to create an incentive for the frontline workers to do their important work. But also, it was just, it was right. We wanted to say thank you to them for that. And I'm talking about healthcare workers, but also, the people who are dealing with the public, selling food, doing the curbside delivery, there are any number of jobs where people are on the front line. And so we did pass this bill. And Alice, you may want to hold forth on it a bit more. I think it was an important bill. This is a bad time, and we're doing a lot of things that are really hard to do. Telling people, I know you've been trying to run a business, you got to shut it down. There's a lot of hard stuff we do, but this was one that I was happy. I felt good the day we passed this,
right?
Because these people deserve it and they need it.
So I'd like to pick up on that, because there are things that this pandemic have illustrated, and things we've done well. So one of the things we've done really well was getting the homeless ASAP into safe housing, into motel space. Boston, a third of Boston's homeless population has COVID. None of Vermont's homeless population, not one homeless person in Vermont has COVID to date. That is something Vermonters should be really proud of. And that's terrific. We're also working, every one of our committees is identifying lessons learned, things we've learned from this that we want to either change statute going forward permanently, things that we have done temporarily that we may want to be permanent in terms of flexibilities. And so we have task forces in the Senate working on lessons learned and transitions. And I'm working on the lessons learned. If any of you have ideas on lessons learned, let us know. All of us are interested in learning from all of you on how this has affected us and how we can improve things for the future. And we are, it's just astonishing. So for example, land records. We have 251 different ways land records are being managed in the state. Every town manages them a little differently. We had people who were desperate financially and had to refinance their homes, and that requires an appraisal. And people could not get access to land records. Finally, there's impetus to digitize the land records. This is one of the silver linings that's coming out of this crisis and out of our having to learn to work in this way, is that we're finally sort of stepping into the 21st century and we'll be doing some of these things to enable our life as Vermonters going forward.
I just would like
I think it's.
Oh, sorry, Dick. I just would like to say there are so many things we would really like to talk about, things that have gone on that we're trying to do to help everybody. And in the meantime, I'm thinking always of, the teachers who are teaching on Zoom.
Yeah.
Not everybody in the state has access to Zoom, so there's many more complicated teaching going, much more complicated teaching going on, because there are many areas not served by the internet. And so there are some school buses that are bringing around aides and teachers on school buses, bringing meals around and bring schoolwork with it. And there are all the people who are at home with their children trying to do at-home teaching when they've never been in that position before, as well as at the same time work from home, some of them, and some of them work away from home, and their children are going to daycare where the daycare person is trying to help out with the education. So many situations in the state that people have been great, and it's a very painful time for many people. So thanks for all that all of you are doing.
Yes, thank you so
It's
much.
It's kind of a cliche, but they say, a crisis brings out who people really are. And I think you see that all over Vermont. You're just charity, courage, dedication, diligence. It's been great. Hey, Alice, should we talk a little bit? We're both on appropriations about the budgeting process, because it's sort of a brand new budgeting process.
Go ahead, Dick. It's
Okay, I'll get it started. Is that we don't know what things are going to be like in the near future. I mean, people don't know, should they schedule a vacation in August or not? There are people, should they have their wedding in August or not? There's all these, we don't know what's out there. And that includes the budget writing committees. We don't know what revenues are going to look like. We don't know what the expenses are going to be. So one of the things we're doing is budgeting incrementally. We are, every year we pass what's called the Budget Adjustment Act, which is you take the budget that was written the year before, and you say, okay, this didn't turn out quite the way we expected. This did better than we thought, and we make adjustments. That's why it's called the Adjustment Act. Well, we do that every January, the middle of the fiscal year. We're going to pass basically a Budget Readjustment Act, a new improved Budget Adjustment Act to get us through to July 1st. Then we're going to do, what is it, Al? It's the next quarter, the next 3 months after July 1st. And then we'll take it up after that.
for another 3 months. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and move it step by step, because which is not ideal, and we would not do it this way if we could just do an annual budget like usual.
And that reminds me of something that people always ask about: paving. So paving, we had the transportation secretary in to talk about paving, what's going on. So almost all the projects are going forward that are on the schedule. And even though some people said, well, the price of oil per barrel is way down, you can get more, more pavement material. Well, the fact is these contracts go out well in advance. So, but all the paving is going on. There's a couple of projects. There's like some that weren't quite ready, so they aren't going. I think the bridge between Hinsdale and Brattleboro is not going. And there are a couple other small things that aren't going, but basically everything else is moving right on. Next year, it'll be a different story. But
yeah,
right,
well, good outdoor distancing, physical distancing work. So it's, but I think in Senate government operations, we are particularly grateful. I mean, while we are so grateful to everybody who has stepped up and is enabling our life through this crisis, I do a particular shout out to not only parents, but to EMS workers who have had their, who are really working under tough circumstances and under serious financial constraint and equipment constraints. And so I really applaud them. Their funding model is very complicated and is flawed. They aren't transporting people as often, and that's what they're paid for. I just want to do a big shout out and a big thank you to our emergency services people and our law enforcement, everyone, teachers. We had a wonderful teacher appreciation. I think almost every community did, with the teachers on the green in Woodstock, and there was a big parade, a big drive-by with banners and screamers and everybody saying thank you, because they really turned that around in a heartbeat, to just like doctors have with telemedicine. So some of the things we're learning that we asked doctors who've been retired for less than 3 years, whose licenses were still pretty good, to come back in and we would give them temporary licenses again. I mean, it's been wonderful. Telemedicine, the things we're learning that we are able to now go forward and do more of is it's really quite exciting actually to see the things that we're learning.
I just wanted to, well, I had you just ask you how you've all been adjusting to this new world, and what's it like for you to have to transition and legislate remotely?
I think the most frustrating part has been not being able to help the people with unemployment insurance. I mean, you hear such absolutely very sad stories. People didn't hear anything. They were out there in limbo. That's been the hardest part, not being able to, even though, we can send something in, but you can't solve the problem. And so that's been just the worst part of, I mean, there's a lot of healthcare things that are absolutely terrible. 2 people dying in my community from COVID. And, there's all of those issues, but also on a daily basis, every, emails and calls from people who
are desperate. And we know that we knew before this happened that most Vermonters have less than $1,000 in savings. And so this has been brutal for people. And the stories, the individual experiences, the people working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to figure out which job do I file for when 2 out of the 3 are not open. It's been we've all been learning so much about our employment system and our unemployment system during the course of this, but it has been a privilege for us, I think, to have you trust us with your stories and with trying to help solve these problems. And it's been really moving and very frustrating that we haven't been able to do it in a speedier, more efficient fashion.
Yeah, the UI thing is really, there's no excuse for it. And everybody, including the legislature, I mean, it's not a total surprise that the Labor Department's computers were outdated. We knew that. And we have to take some responsibility for that. But I even think a new, improved computer system would have been overwhelmed by this. Alison, being on economic development, you may know the numbers, and it's a dirty trick to ask you if you don't. But it's what the Labor Department usually had to deal with on a weekly basis of people signing up, and what they've been dealing with since COVID.
Right. Hundreds, not tens of thousands.
That's right.
It's gone from hundreds a week to tens of thousands a week. So in the 8 weeks, it's been over 87,000 people. I mean, that's just it's like a tsunami for them.
Yeah, but that is small consolation to an individual. I mean, you hear, I've had people who say, I've called 200 times on Wednesday and never got through. And of course, I think a lot of us, not just with UI, in general, a pet peeve of mine is that the computerized forms usually don't envision your particular situation. The question you're supposed to answer, you can't answer. And it's that kind of thing. And then you need to talk to a human being. And if you can't get through, it's terribly frustrating for people.
Well, it's been a privilege to advocate for many people. We finally now have a portal so that we can help a little more directly. But also DOL, to its credit, has done an amazing job working as fast and as hard as they can. And so it's not that no one needs to blame anybody. It's getting better every day. But to ask people continually to be patient has just been a heartbreaking thing to have to do. But it's they're getting resolved. I believe we as Alice, the governor will have had an update today, and I did not hear his press conference, but there was an update today on what they pushed through this weekend. They worked, all weekend trying to clear up the 15,000 cases that are still out there.
Yeah, they're doing the best they can.
I guess I'd like to just say, feel free to call me at home, 802-228-8432. We're getting hundreds and hundreds of emails. Sometimes it's better just to call.
I bet you are, and that was one thing I wanted to ask you: is how are people getting a hold of you? Right?
People email, people call. people, no one's written, quite honestly, but everyone's emailed or called, and that's what we're here for.
I do want to say that I take great pride in answering all my emails
Yeah.
in a timely fashion. These days, not so good. If there are people who have contacted me and I haven't given you even the courtesy of a reply, I'm sorry. I'm getting a lot of email and I'm spending a lot of time on Zoom. Yeah, but do feel free to get in touch.
Finally, this is typically when you wrap up a legislative session. So is there an end in sight for you?
No.
We don't know.
I hope you all stay. Is there an end in sight?
Not
Gosh.
to COVID, but I mean, just the legislative session. I
That's
mean,
a metaphysical question. Yes, we all have an end at some point.
At some point. No, we don't know. We don't know.
Going because we have that 3-month budgeting going on that we need to look at what money is available, what isn't available. So that's why we're doing the 3-month budgeting. So
Yeah.
you'll be going through the summer.
Oh yes, every day we get a clearer notion of what federal money we're able to use for what. But it just getting clarity on that is taken quite a bit of time. So getting clarity on that in each committee and in each subject area and the guidance isn't always so clear. And our joint fiscal office and our legislative council are working very hard with us to get that kind of clarity and be able to apply it to the priorities we have.
Understood. Okay.
Thanks,
Well,
Pat.
I think I'll let you go there. And
Patrick, this was great. This was great. And I think we could do it again in, 2 weeks or something. If we could do it as an update every, once a month or once every 2 or 3 weeks.
we'd love that. I mean, this is probably more. I know I've tried in the past during the sessions to get you to come in, and that's tends to be trickier. I mean, with this,
But we could do this during session.
with this Zoom platform,
Yeah.
we can really do that. Maybe make them shorter and more like topical.
Yes.
So how,
If you're into that, we would be too. Thanks to each of the Windsor District senators for joining us today and giving us a sort of a snapshot on the current state of affairs in Vermont and the committee updates. And I know it's a whole new sort of paradigm we're living in.
So thank you so much. We'll have an update, I hope, soon on the transition back into everyday life, or at least semi-normal life. So thank you for listening and watching, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you all.